Greetings. Welcome to those joining us in this peaceful moment. Throughout the world's oceans, patches of land emerge from the water that surrounds them, creating islands in countless forms and dimensions. Forces acting below the Earth's surface bring some into existence, while others take shape bit by bit through accumulating sediment or the growth of coral frameworks. These landforms stay linked to larger networks involving water, atmosphere, and terrain, transforming gradually across extended timescales. What follows is a straightforward account of islands as they exist in nature, delivered in measured and steady terms. Land entirely ringed by water forms what we call an island, a geographical feature that stands apart from larger continental masses. Whether the surrounding water comes from oceans, seas, lakes, or rivers, it creates an unbroken perimeter that establishes where the island ends. At the shoreline, terrestrial ground meets aquatic space in a zone that constantly shifts through natural processes like tides, waves, and the movement of sediment. Islands range dramatically in size, from tiny rocky points jutting above the surface to vast territories holding mountains, plains, rivers, and lakes of their own. Regardless of how large or small they are, all islands share one defining trait, which is water encircling them completely. They may exist alone or cluster together in groups, and their interiors can display diverse geological materials, soil types, and landforms. The water surrounding an island shapes local climate conditions, affecting moisture availability and how quickly temperatures rise and fall, often creating environments distinct from those on nearby mainland shores. Around the edges, island coastlines take various forms, including beaches, cliffs, wetlands, or rocky platforms, depending on what the island is made of and how exposed it is to waves and currents. Across extended time periods, island shapes transform as their coastlines experience erosion, sediment buildup, or reshaping through persistent interaction with the water around them. This fundamental understanding holds true for all islands, whatever their origin, makeup, or position on the planet. Volcanic activity beneath the ocean floor can give rise to islands when molten rock from deep within the Earth pushes upward through fractures in the crust. Once magma breaks through the seafloor, it meets cold seawater and solidifies, forming layers of volcanic rock that pile up around the opening. Through repeated eruptions spanning long geological periods, a submarine mountain gradually builds higher with each new deposit of lava and ash. Should this underwater structure keep growing, its summit may eventually break through the ocean surface, creating new land where once there was only water. The exposed section becomes an island built mainly from igneous rock, typically basalt in character, representing material that originated deep within the mantle. Early in its existence, such an island displays an uneven surface marked by slopes, ridges, and volcanic features shaped by successive eruptions and flowing lava. Weathering begins to work on the rock immediately upon exposure to air and moisture, steadily breaking it into smaller fragments that start forming soil. Rain, wind, and shifting temperatures all influence how fast these surface materials develop and how the terrain changes over time. On steeper inclines, streams may begin flowing, transporting sediment coastward, where it can gather into beaches or small deltas. Although erosion may partially alter the original volcanic form over time, the island's core preserves a record of its fiery birth. Land emerges when underwater volcanoes stack layers of hardened lava high enough for their peaks to rise above the waterline, forming islands directly connected to submarine volcanic foundations. Each eruption contributes another layer of material that cools and solidifies when it touches seawater or air, steadily raising the volcanic structure higher. The island that results often features a central elevated zone marking the main vent or series of vents, with slopes radiating outward toward the surrounding sea. Before cooling, lava may flow across the surface, creating either broad, gently sloping terrain or more jagged landscapes depending on how thick and sticky the molten rock was. Volcanic ash and broken rock fragments can also settle across the surface, adding to the island's layered internal structure. As volcanic activity persists, the island can grow not just upward, but sideways as well, with fresh land pushing the shoreline farther out. Long after the most intense eruptive period ends, cracks, vents, and other volcanic features may remain visible, marking the routes magma once traveled to reach the surface. When hot lava meets seawater, the interaction generates steam and shattered rock, scattering additional material around the expanding structure. Once the island stands above sea level, atmospheric forces like rainfall and wind erosion take over, gradually smoothing the sharp volcanic shapes. Both the constructive force of volcanic eruptions and the modifying influence of weathering work together to shape how these islands look over the long term. Near the boundaries where tectonic plates meet, volcanic islands frequently appear because these zones are where sections of the Earth's outer shell interact through movement, collision, or pulling apart. Stress builds within the crust at these boundaries, creating conditions that permit magma to rise from deeper levels toward the surface. At divergent boundaries where plates separate, molten material may emerge through fractures, sometimes contributing to the formation of submarine ridges and occasional islands. At convergent boundaries where plates push together, one plate may sink beneath another in a process that generates melting in the descending slab, producing magma that supplies volcanic systems. These boundary regions therefore become zones where volcanic activity is more common, and many island chains follow the patterns established by these tectonic settings. The positions of these islands mirror the geometry of the plates and how they interact, resulting in linear or curved arrangements that trace underlying geological structures. Rocks found on these islands typically bear evidence of volcanic origins, including features created by cooling lava and violent eruptions. As plate motion continues through time, the locations of volcanic centers can shift, influencing where future islands might form. Surface processes like erosion and sediment deposition then modify the volcanic foundation, reshaping slopes and coastal edges. The relationship between tectonic forces and island creation shows how processes operating on a planetary scale shape smaller features at the surface. Within the Earth's mantle, hotspots can generate chains of volcanic islands as tectonic plates drift slowly over relatively stationary sources of rising heat and magma. In this arrangement, a column of hot material rises from deep in the mantle and partially melts the crust above it, creating magma that drives volcanic eruptions at the surface. When an oceanic plate sits above such a hotspot, volcanic activity may build an island directly over the heat source. As the plate keeps moving, it carries the original island away from the hotspot, and a new volcano may develop in its former position, closer to where heat continues rising. Repeating over vast stretches of time, this process creates a line of islands and underwater volcanic structures that document both the direction and speed of plate movement. The ages of islands typically grow older with increasing distance from the currently active volcanic site, preserving a history of their creation. Erosion wears down older islands over time, and some eventually sink below sea level to become seamounts. The alignment of these islands offers geological proof of both mantle dynamics and plate drift. Surface conditions on each island develop independently after formation, shaped by climate, erosion, and the establishment of living communities. The entire chain represents a prolonged interaction between heat from deep within the Earth and the gradual shifting of the planet's outer layers. Hawaii's islands came into being through hotspot volcanism in the central Pacific Ocean, where a steady heat source within the Earth's mantle delivered magma to the surface across a long geological timespan. As the Pacific tectonic plate crept slowly over this hotspot, repeated eruptions constructed massive volcanic structures that eventually climbed above sea level, forming separate islands. Each island marks a chapter in this movement, with the youngest volcanic land sitting closest to where the hotspot currently lies, and progressively older islands stretching away in a broad chain. The rock composing these islands is predominantly basaltic, matching the type of magma commonly generated in oceanic hotspot environments. Lava spread outward from central vents and cooled into solid rock, creating the fundamental structure of each island. Through time, weathering worked on these rocks, gradually reducing them to mineral particles that helped soil develop. Rainfall, water running across the surface, and groundwater flow further sculpted the landscape by wearing down slopes and moving sediment toward coastal zones. Valleys and drainage networks formed as water found the easiest routes across the volcanic terrain. Wave action continues reshaping the coastlines of these islands, stripping rock away in some places while depositing sediment in others. Though volcanic activity still occurs in parts of the chain, many of the older islands are now shaped more by surface processes than by ongoing eruptions, demonstrating the shift from volcanic building to gradual landscape transformation. Where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, island arcs take shape in regions experiencing a process called subduction that happens along convergent plate boundaries. In these settings, the sinking plate gets pushed downward into the mantle, where rising pressure and temperature cause portions of it to melt. This melting produces magma that ascends through the overlying plate, supplying volcanic systems that may eventually build islands above sea level. The islands that form often line up in curved chains, running parallel to the boundary between the interacting plates, mirroring the geometry of the subduction zone. Volcanic activity within these arcs may happen at several centers along the boundary, creating a series of islands rather than one continuous landmass. Rocks formed in these environments include volcanic materials like lava flows, ash layers, and fragmented rock created by explosive eruptions. As these materials pile up and harden over time, they create layered structures that make up the island cores. Earthquakes also occur frequently in subduction zones as plate movement releases accumulated stress along fault lines. Surface processes including rainfall, river flow, and coastal erosion then work on the volcanic framework, sculpting slopes, valleys, and shorelines. Sediment stripped from the islands can wash into nearby marine basins, adding to seabed deposits. The complete structure of an island arc preserves evidence of both the deep earth processes that created the magma and the surface forces that slowly modify the exposed land. Curved chains of volcanic islands commonly emerge from subduction zones because the boundary between converging plates rarely runs straight across long distances. Variations in how the plates are shaped, which direction they move, and local geological structure all affect the path of the boundary, producing arcs that curve across the ocean surface. These island chains trace the shape of the descending plate as it sinks into the mantle. Magma forms above the zone where the plate descends, establishing a line of volcanic centers that follow the same general curve. As eruptions add material to each volcanic structure, islands may appear at intervals along this arc, with stretches of ocean between them where volcanic peaks remain underwater. Differences in eruption history, magma availability, and erosion rates cause individual islands within the arc to differ in size and height. Some may build steep mountainous centers, while others stay lower with gentler relief. Through time, the balance between tectonic uplift and erosion determines how high each island rises above the sea. Marine forces continue working on the coastlines, carving cliffs, creating beaches, and moving sediment along the shores. The arc pattern, visible when viewed regionally, reflects a large-scale geological structure, while each island within it develops its own local terrain shaped by both volcanic construction and surface modification. Plate convergence in the Western Pacific has created many islands where multiple tectonic plates meet in a complex web of boundaries. This region contains several subduction zones where oceanic plates sink beneath neighboring plates, generating magma that supplies volcanic island systems. The resulting islands arrange themselves in chains and clusters that align with different segments of these plate boundaries. Geological materials on these islands commonly include volcanic rock, layers of ash, and intrusive formations created as magma cooled beneath the surface. Ongoing tectonic movement can lift sections of the crust, raising parts of islands and changing their topography through time. Meanwhile, erosion from rainfall, rivers, and coastal forces gradually wears away elevated areas, carrying sediment toward the sea. River valleys may cut into volcanic slopes, and coastal plains can form where sediment piles up near the water's edge. Offshore, eroded material adds to marine deposits accumulating on the ocean floor. The interplay between tectonic forces and surface processes produces landscapes that reflect both deep earth activity and continuous environmental change. Variations in rock type, elevation, and exposure to ocean conditions create differences in coastline shape, drainage patterns, and soil characteristics from one island to another. Together, these features show how converging plates influence not just the creation of islands, but also how they develop physically over the long term. Coral islands grow from reef-building corals in warm, shallow marine settings, where sunlight penetrates the water and supports the biological processes involved in reef construction. Corals produce calcium carbonate, which builds up as a solid framework that gradually extends upward and outward through time. These reef structures often start forming along the margins of existing landforms, like volcanic islands, where conditions suit the establishment of coral colonies. As coral generations grow and die, their skeletal remains add to the reef mass, creating a wide, shallow platform near the ocean surface. Waves break down fragments of coral and other reef organisms into sand-sized grains that gather on the reef surface, forming low-lying areas of land. This process can create islands composed mainly of biological material, rather than volcanic or continental rock. The height of such islands above sea level is typically limited, because their formation relies on the balance between coral growth, sediment accumulation, and where sea level sits. Waves and currents keep shaping the outlines of coral islands by moving sand and reef debris along their edges. Through time, vegetation may take root in developing soils, helping to anchor the surface and reduce erosion. The structure and survival of coral islands therefore depend on interactions between biological reef growth, sediment processes, and surrounding ocean conditions. Around sinking volcanic islands, coral reefs can form as coral organisms keep growing upward towards sunlight, while the original volcanic foundation slowly descends. In this process, the solid volcanic base gradually sinks due to cooling and increased density of the crust below, while reef-building corals maintain their position near the sea surface by continuously adding new calcium carbonate material. Across long time periods, this upward reef growth can match the pace of gradual sinking, preserving a shallow water reef environment even as the central landmass shrinks. The original shoreline of the volcanic island may separate from the reef as a shallow lagoon forms, while the land surface drops relative to sea level. Sediment produced by biological activity on the reef can collect along the rim, helping to create low-lying land areas. Waves and currents move this material around, shaping sandbanks and small islets on the reef platform. The resulting structure reflects a balance between geological sinking and biological building. Water flowing through the reef system affects sediment distribution and lagoon depth. Eventually, the central volcanic island may disappear entirely beneath the surface, leaving the reef as the main visible feature. This transformation demonstrates how biological processes can sustain landforms even as underlying geological structures change. After the central volcanic island sinks, a ring-shaped coral atoll may remain as the visible marker of where the island once stood. An atoll typically forms a circular or oval reef structure surrounding a lagoon, indicating the spot where coral growth continued while the original volcanic peak dropped beneath the surface. The reef rim builds from successive generations of coral growth, with skeletal remains piling up into a solid limestone framework. Sediment created from broken coral pieces and shells can gather on portions of the rim, forming narrow strips of land that rise slightly above sea level. These land areas are generally low in elevation and may change shape as waves and currents shift sand and debris along the reef edge. The lagoon inside the ring is usually shallow compared to the open ocean, though its depth can vary based on sediment input and water circulation. Channels cutting through the reef may link the lagoon to the surrounding sea, letting tides and currents move water in and out. The overall form of an atoll preserves evidence of an earlier volcanic island and the persistent upward growth of coral communities. How stable the structure remains depends on whether suitable environmental conditions for coral growth continue. Across geological time, changes in sea level or reef health can alter the size and shape of the atoll. A central lagoon surrounded by coral reefs makes up the distinctive landform known as an atoll, primarily biological in origin yet influenced by geological processes. The reef structure creates a framework of calcium carbonate, which accumulates as corals grow and as skeletal fragments from various reef organisms get compressed together. The lagoon fills the area where the original island once existed, or where reef growth has enclosed a section of shallow sea. Water inside the lagoon tends to be calmer than the open ocean, because the reef rim acts as a partial barrier. Sediment can settle in the lagoon, slowly changing its depth and internal characteristics. The reef edge facing the open sea often experiences stronger wave action, which can break coral material into sand and gravel that then gets carried across the reef surface. Low-lying land areas on the rim may develop where this sediment piles up above the height of normal wave wash. Vegetation can take hold on these areas if conditions permit, helping to stabilize the surface. The shape and completeness of the reef rim can vary, with some sections broken by channels that allow water exchange. The atoll structure therefore represents an interaction between coral growth, sediment movement, and ocean forces. Clear, sunlit seawater is essential for coral growth because the symbiotic algae living inside coral tissues need light to perform photosynthesis. This biological partnership lets corals draw much of their energy from sunlight, making shallow, transparent water crucial for reef development. Suspended sediments or pollutants that cloud the water can restrict the depth range where corals can survive. Most reef-building corals therefore live in waters, where light penetration stays strong enough to support this process. Temperature also plays a role in coral growth, with many reef systems developing in warm ocean regions, where conditions stay relatively stable year-round. Water movement matters too, as it brings nutrients and oxygen while carrying away waste products from coral surfaces. The gradual accumulation of calcium carbonate skeletons from countless coral organisms slowly builds the physical reef structure. As this structure grows upward and outward, it creates habitats that shape local water flow and sediment patterns. The health and longevity of coral islands depend partly on whether corals can keep up these growth processes. Changes in environmental conditions can therefore impact the long-term development of reef-based landforms. Within tropical ocean regions, where sea surface temperatures and light levels support sustained reef growth, most coral islands are found. These regions typically lie within latitudes where sunlight stays strong throughout the year, allowing photosynthetic processes within corals to function continuously. Warm water boosts the metabolic activity of reef-building organisms, contributing to steady buildup of calcium carbonate material. Tropical circulation patterns shape the distribution of suitable shallow water environments where reefs can establish along submerged platforms or around existing islands. In these settings, biological production of reef material can match moderate changes in sea level, keeping reef structures near the surface. Sediment derived from reef organisms gathers on reef flats and along edges, forming sandy areas that may evolve into low-lying islands. Ocean currents in tropical regions help carry larvae and maintain ecological links between reef systems. The location of coral islands therefore reflects both biological needs and oceanographic conditions. Though individual islands differ in size and shape, their presence within tropical zones follows a consistent global pattern. This distribution shows how coral island formation depends on specific environmental parameters tied to temperature, light, and water clarity. Parts of continental crust that separated from larger land masses through processes like rising sea levels, rifting, or tectonic movement form what we call continental islands. Their underlying rocks match the composition of nearby continents and may include sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous formations. These islands often sit on the shallow continental shelves rather than in deep ocean basins. Geological structures like folded rock layers and ancient crystalline formations may be present, reflecting extensive geological histories. Coastlines of continental islands can display evidence of former connections to mainlands, including submerged ridges or shallow underwater banks. Through time, erosion and sediment deposition reshape these coastlines in ways similar to continental shores. River systems may develop on larger continental islands, moving sediment from interior regions toward the sea. Soil types can be diverse due to the variety of underlying rock materials. Climate patterns on these islands get influenced both by surrounding seas and by their internal terrain. Their formation illustrates how shifts in sea level and crustal movement can isolate portions of continental land. Ancient crystalline rocks and extensive ice cover make up most of Greenland, a large continental island whose geological foundation forms part of the North American continental plate. An ice sheet blankets much of its surface, influencing erosion and sediment transport across the landscape. Coastal regions display fjords carved by glaciers during colder climatic periods. The island's bedrock preserves evidence of long-term geological processes, including metamorphism and magma intrusion. Glacial movement has sculpted valleys and carried rock debris toward the coast. During warmer seasons, meltwater streams flow across the surface, contributing to sediment movement. The continental shelf surrounding the island is relatively broad in places, suggesting former lower sea levels. Coastal erosion continues where waves work against exposed rock and sediment. Greenland's classification as a continental island reflects its crustal origin rather than volcanic construction. Tectonic forces gradually opened an ocean basin between Madagascar and mainland Africa, separating them over time. This separation involved the rifting of continental crust, followed by the formation of new oceanic crust in the widening gap. The island's rocks include ancient continental materials that existed before its isolation. Geological structures reveal evidence of past mountain building and metamorphic activity. Erosion across long periods has shaped plateaus, valleys, and coastal plains. River systems carry sediment from interior highlands toward the surrounding sea. The coastline includes both rocky stretches and areas where sediment accumulates. Offshore shelves and basins preserve the history of crustal stretching and marine deposition. The island's separation shows how plate movement can divide continental regions into separate landmasses. Its current form reflects both its continental origin and ongoing surface processes. Along coastlines where waves and currents deposit sand in elongated ridges parallel to the shore, barrier islands take form. These islands typically sit low in elevation and consist mainly of loose sediment. Longshore currents transport sand along the coast, helping to maintain and reshape the barrier structure. Inlets may open and close as storms and tidal flows change sediment distribution. The landward side of a barrier island often lies next to lagoons, bays, or marshes, sheltered from direct wave action. Vegetation can anchor dunes on the island surface, limiting wind erosion. The position and shape of barrier islands shift over time as sediment supply and wave energy change. Storm events may cut through or rearrange sections of the islands. Their survival depends on a balance between sediment input and erosive forces. Barrier islands demonstrate the dynamic interaction between coastal sediment processes and ocean movement. Sediment deposited by rivers at their mouths gives rise to some islands, where flowing water slows and releases carried particles into coastal zones. Through time, layers of sand, silt and clay can pile up above sea level, forming delta islands. These islands often feature flat surfaces shaped by channels that distribute river flow. Sediment composition mirrors materials eroded from upstream landscapes. Tides and waves can reshape the outer edges of delta islands by redistributing sediment. Flood events may deposit new layers, gradually raising land elevation. Vegetation can take root on stable surfaces, helping to bind sediment together. Shifting channels may split or reconnect parts of the island. Sinking of underlying sediments can affect long-term stability. Delta islands show how river processes contribute to island formation in coastal environments. Landforms carved by glacial activity can later become islands when ice masses erode valleys and basins that rising sea levels subsequently flood. Moving ice grinds against bedrock, deepening valleys and widening depressions through abrasion and plucking. When the climate warms and glaciers pull back, seawater can flood these low areas, isolating higher sections of land as islands. The resulting islands often display irregular coastlines with steep slopes where ice once traveled. Rock surfaces may show smoothing or scratches produced by glacial movement. Sediment left behind by melting ice can gather in nearby waters. Fjord landscapes commonly contain many small rocky islands formed in this manner. Their shapes reflect both glacial erosion and later marine processes. Weathering gradually changes exposed rock faces after the ice vanishes. These islands illustrate the link between glacial history and present coastal geography. Rising sea levels following glacier retreat can isolate higher ground, creating islands from previously connected terrain. This process happens when ocean water floods low-lying areas while elevated ridges stay above the surface. The resulting islands may follow the pattern of former hills or plateaus. Submerged valleys between them turn into channels or straits. Sediment deposited by glaciers can shape shoreline form. Waves and tides start modifying the new coasts once they become exposed to marine conditions. Vegetation gradually takes hold on stable surfaces, contributing to soil development. Through time, erosion smooths steep edges left by glacial retreat. The distribution of such islands often mirrors where ice sheets once extended. Their formation shows how changes in global sea level can reshape landscapes. Many small rocky islands fill fjord regions where glacial valleys meet the sea. These islands typically consist of hard bedrock resistant to erosion. Steep slopes may drop directly into deep water along fjord margins. Glacial carving created over-deepened basins that now contain seawater. Isolated peaks and ridges remain as islands above these waters. Sediment from surrounding slopes can gather in sheltered inlets. Water circulation within fjords affects sediment distribution and erosion. Freeze-thaw cycles continue breaking down rock surfaces in colder climates. Soil layers may stay thin due to limited weathering. These islands reflect a combination of glacial shaping and ongoing coastal processes. From tiny, rocky outcrops to expansive land masses, islands exist across a remarkable spectrum of sizes. The scale of an island determines much about its physical character. Rivers carve their paths differently depending on available space, while slopes and shorelines take shape according to the land area they have to work with. When an island reaches a certain size, it can support mountain ranges that rise dramatically from the coast, alongside expansive plains that stretch between elevated terrain. Multiple watersheds may emerge, each directing water through its own network of channels. Smaller islands present a different picture entirely. Their landforms tend toward simplicity, molded primarily by the relentless action of coastal forces rather than complex internal drainage. Surface area plays a crucial role in determining how deeply soil can develop and how extensively vegetation can spread across the landscape. Lakes and other inland water bodies find room to form only where islands grow large enough to contain them. The way water drains across an island follows patterns dictated by both elevation changes and the underlying rock structure. Local climate takes its character partly from how much land mass exists relative to the surrounding ocean. Even the formation of bays and headlands along the coast responds to the overall size of the island. This wide variation in scale reveals just how diverse island environments can be across our planet. Where land meets water, the coastline traces a boundary that never stays completely still. Natural processes work continuously to reshape this edge. Energy travels through waves as they crash against the shore, and this energy either wears away material or adds to it depending on conditions. Tides rise and fall in their rhythmic cycles, causing water levels to shift regularly along the coastal margin. In many places, currents run parallel to the shore, picking up sediment and carrying it along their path. The speed at which a coast erodes depends heavily on what kind of rock forms its foundation. Softer geological materials often give way to create beaches, while harder rock formations resist the ocean's assault and stand as cliffs. Plants growing close to the water's edge serve an important protective function by holding soil in place with their root systems. Meanwhile, chemical reactions unfold where seawater contacts minerals in the rock, gradually contributing to its breakdown. As centuries pass, coastlines migrate inland or extend seaward as material gets stripped away or accumulates. This constantly evolving shoreline embodies the perpetual dialogue between terrestrial and marine environments. The meeting point of land and sea takes its shape from several forces working in combination. Waves, currents, and weathering processes all contribute to determining how coastlines develop their particular character. When waves reach shallow water, they release their energy against the shore, dislodging fragments of rock and pushing sediment around. Currents then take over, moving this loose material along the coastline and gradually shifting where the shoreline sits. Chemical weathering attacks the mineral structure at the rock surface, making it progressively weaker. Physical weathering takes a different approach, fracturing rock into progressively smaller fragments through processes like expansion when heated, contraction when cooled, and the action of moisture. Whether a coast primarily erodes or builds up depends on the balance between these destructive and constructive forces. Coastlines built of hard rock typically transform much more slowly than those made of soft sediment. Wave energy fluctuates with the seasons, and these variations can speed up or slow down the rate of coastal change. The landforms we see along any coast reflect these processes playing out over time. Given enough centuries or millennia, these forces can dramatically transform the outer edges of islands. Along many island shores, cliffs rise steeply where waves have persistently attacked the coastline. Wave action concentrates its force at the base of rock faces, steadily removing material from this vulnerable zone. Water slams repeatedly against the shore, often carrying debris that acts like tools to wear away the rock. This undercutting eventually causes the rock above to lose support and collapse. The result can be dramatically steep coastal profiles that expose fresh rock to continued assault. Different rock types retreat at different speeds under this assault. Where fractures and joints run through the rock, they create pathways that allow water to penetrate deeper and weaken the internal structure. During storms, waves carry even more energy and can accelerate the erosion dramatically during these high-energy events. Fallen rock piles up at the cliff base for a time before the ocean breaks it down into smaller pieces. As cliffs continue their retreat landward over the years, they sometimes leave behind flat platforms cut by wave action. These horizontal surfaces preserve the memory of where the shoreline once stood. The formation of cliffs demonstrates how powerfully marine energy can sculpt island coastlines. Beaches emerge on islands where conditions allow sediment transported by water to settle and accumulate. Wave energy needs to be just right for particles like sand, gravel, or shell fragments to come to rest rather than continue moving. These materials pile up in areas where currents lose speed and can no longer carry their load. What a beach is made of tells a story about where its sediment originated, whether from eroded bedrock somewhere along the coast, fragments of broken coral, or material delivered by rivers. Waves never stop moving these particles around, and their constant motion produces gradual transformations in how beaches are shaped. The width and slope of a beach can change noticeably between seasons. When wave activity intensifies, finer materials often get carried away from the beach toward deeper water offshore. Above the line, where high tides reach, vegetation sometimes takes root and helps lock the sand in place. How far tides rise and fall influences what portion of the beach lies exposed to the air at any given time. Beach systems function as temporary storage areas for sediment that moves through the coastal zone. Their shape at any moment reflects the ongoing balance between how much material arrives and how much gets removed. When waves approach a coastline at an angle, they set up a long shore current that moves sand along the island coast. This current carries sediment on a path that runs parallel to the shoreline rather than straight in from the ocean. Which direction the sediment travels depends on which way waves typically approach the coast. Where the current slows down, material begins to drop out or and pile up. Over time, this ongoing process can construct features like spits that extend from the shore, offshore bars, or beaches that stretch for considerable distances. Natural obstacles such as headlands, jutting into the water, or gaps where inlets cut through can interrupt the flow and trap sediment that was moving along. If wave patterns shift, the direction of sediment transport can actually reverse. Human-built structures sometimes interfere with these natural sediment pathways, though natural forces still dominate the system overall. Particles in constant motion along the coast lead to gradual adjustments in where the shoreline sits. Longshore transport represents one of the fundamental mechanisms controlling how sediment moves through coastal environments. The regular rise and fall of tides exerts significant influence over how shallow island shorelines are configured. Tides expose and then submerge coastal areas in predictable cycles that repeat day after day. These fluctuations control where sediment can be deposited and where it gets eroded away. Currents driven by tidal movement push sand and mud through narrow inlets and winding channels. Where tidal ranges reach their greatest extent, broad intertidal flats can develop that lie exposed at low tide and underwater at high tide. Living organisms that inhabit these zones between water levels play their own role in holding sediment stable. How tides and waves interact together determines the ultimate configuration of the shoreline. Tidal energy also shapes environments like estuaries and lagoons that form in connection with islands. Through countless tidal cycles, these regular movements help establish and maintain coastal features. The tidal cycle, therefore, stands as a major factor in determining island coastal morphology. During periods when strong winds blow and atmospheric pressure drops, storm waves deliver dramatically increased energy to island coastlines. These larger waves possess the power to move sediment that would remain stable under normal conditions, including heavier particles that typical waves cannot budge. They can also erode exposed rock at speeds far exceeding what happens during calm weather. Beaches often lose width temporarily as sand gets carried either offshore or laterally along the coast. Cliffs and coastal dunes face accelerated erosion when storms strike repeatedly over time. Material stripped from one section of coast may eventually settle elsewhere, redistributed by the storm's energy. How much impact storms have overall depends on how often they occur and how intense they are when they arrive. During calmer weather between storms, coastal features can recover as sediment gradually returns to where it was removed from. This variability in storm impacts contributes to how shorelines change over the long term. Coastal vegetation may suffer damage during intense storms, but often regrows when conditions improve. Storm activity represents just one of multiple natural forces that influence how island coasts evolve. Rocks on islands break down through chemical weathering as minerals react with water, air, or various dissolved substances. Rainwater can dissolve certain minerals outright, particularly in rocks where calcium carbonate forms a major component. When minerals encounter oxygen, oxidation reactions occur that alter their chemical composition. These chemical transformations gradually weaken the structural integrity of rock over time. Climates that combine warmth and moisture tend to accelerate chemical weathering rates significantly. The products of these reactions become raw material for soil formation. Dissolved materials often get transported away by water moving through the ground or flowing across the surface. Rock surfaces undergo gradual changes in both texture and composition through these processes. How fast these changes occur depends on what minerals make up the rock and what environmental conditions prevail. Chemical weathering functions as a continuous factor in how island landscapes develop over time. Temperature changes and water movement can also break down rock through physical weathering, fragmenting it without changing what minerals it contains. As rock heats up and cools down, expansion and contraction create stress within the layers. In colder climates, water that seeps into cracks can freeze and expand, forcing fractures to widen. Particles carried by wind or water act as abrasives that gradually wear down exposed surfaces. When seawater evaporates, salt crystals form and grow within tiny pores in the rock, exerting pressure from within. Repeated cycles of these processes slowly break larger rocks into progressively smaller pieces. These fragments may pile up as loose sediment waiting to be moved. Physical weathering prepares material so that erosion can transport it more easily. This process works alongside chemical weathering rather than replacing it. Together, these two forms of weathering determine how much soil and sediment islands can produce. How soil develops on any island depends fundamentally on two things: what kind of rock underlies the surface and what climate conditions prevail. These factors together control how quickly mineral material breaks apart and how much organic matter can build up. When basaltic rocks weather, they can yield soils rich in minerals. Coral-derived sandy material produces thinner soils with quite different characteristics. Temperature and rainfall patterns affect how actively biological processes work within the soil. As plants grow, they contribute organic material that gets incorporated with mineral particles. Soil depth can vary dramatically between steep slopes and low-lying areas. How well water drains through an area influences how much moisture the soil retains. Wind sometimes transports fine particles across the landscape, adding them to existing soil layers. On steep terrain, erosion may strip away soil faster than it forms. Soil development therefore connects geological factors with environmental conditions. Volcanic islands frequently feature soils that trace their origins to basaltic rock formed from weathered lava flows and ash deposits. Basalt contains minerals that break down over time into fine particles. These materials become part of the soil structure and supply nutrient content. Rainfall drives chemical reactions forward that transform the original volcanic rock. Organic matter contributed by vegetation adds another dimension to soil development. Volcanic surfaces that formed recently may have only a thin covering of soil. Areas where volcanism happened long ago tend to show soil profiles that have developed more fully. Erosion moves soil downslope and redistributes it across the landscape. As groundwater moves through soil, it transports minerals from place to place. Soils derived from basalt illustrate how volcanic geology connects directly to surface conditions. Coral islands typically support only thin, sandy soils because most of their surface material consists of broken coral skeletons and shell fragments. These particles are made primarily of calcium carbonate, which gives them a very different mineral makeup compared to continental soils. Their loose, grainy texture lets water drain through quickly rather than being retained. Plants can slowly add organic matter to these soils, introducing some nutrients over time. Wind may carry additional fine particles onto the island surface from elsewhere. How deep the soil becomes often varies with elevation, and how exposed different areas are to wave action. Locations sheltered from strong winds manage to retain more organic material than exposed sites. Nutrient availability may depend partly on inputs delivered by sea spray and biological activity. The structure these soils have influences what vegetation patterns can develop. Sandy soils on coral islands, therefore, reflect the biological processes that created them. Fresh water can accumulate underground on islands in formations called aquifers, where rainfall soaks through permeable ground and collects above the denser seawater below. This fresh water often forms a lens-shaped body that essentially floats on the saline water within porous rock or sediment. How thick this lens grows depends on how much rain falls and how easily water can move through the ground. If too much water gets extracted or if rainfall decreases, freshwater levels can drop. The lens recharges when precipitation percolates down through the soil layers. The boundary separating fresh water from salt water can move up or down as the water supply changes. Near the coast, mixing between the two water types may occur. Aquifers form an essential component of island hydrology. Their stability depends on both climate patterns and geological structure. Underground freshwater systems demonstrate how land and sea interact even below the surface. On some islands, rainfall infiltrates downward through porous ground to create freshwater lenses that store water beneath the surface, separate from any surface water bodies. Porous materials like limestone or sand have tiny spaces that allow water to move downward. As fresh water builds up, it creates pressure that helps prevent seawater from moving upward into the same space. The lens typically becomes thinner as it approaches the coast where mixing with seawater occurs. Vegetation at the surface can influence how quickly water infiltrates downward. Evaporation reduces the total amount of water that successfully reaches the aquifer below. Seasonal patterns in rainfall create corresponding fluctuations in how much water gets stored. In low-lying areas, groundwater sometimes emerges at the surface as springs. How large the lens becomes reflects the long-term balance between water inputs and outputs. This process creates a connection between water that falls from the atmosphere and conditions beneath the ground. Island water supply depends critically on the balance between rainfall and evaporation, which together determine how much fresh water remains accessible in soils and underground aquifers. When evaporation rates run high, moisture stored in the ground decreases. Both wind and temperature affect how quickly evaporation proceeds. Islands situated in humid climates generally manage to retain more moisture in their soils. Dry conditions typically result in less water recharging the groundwater supply. Different soil types control how quickly water either drains away or stays put. Vegetation can reduce evaporation by creating shade over the soil surface. Throughout the year, seasonal variations create a cycle of water storage that rises and falls. This water balance shapes the hydrological character of islands in fundamental ways. The balance between these two processes stands as a key factor in island environmental systems. When waves break against the shore and wind blows inland, sea spray can deposit salt across island surfaces. These tiny salt particles settle onto soil, vegetation, and exposed rock surfaces. Where this deposition happens repeatedly, it can alter the chemistry of soil near the coastline. Some minerals accumulate as the spray evaporates. The presence of salt affects which plants can grow in different locations. How far the spray travels inland depends on wind direction and strength. Rainfall can dissolve these salts and wash them back into the ground. Coastal areas typically show higher concentrations of salt than regions farther from the ocean. Surface materials may develop visible signs of weathering caused by salt. Sea spray creates an atmospheric connection linking the ocean with the land. Wind patterns exert significant influence over how moisture gets distributed across islands by controlling the movement of air masses carrying water vapor. When moist air encounters an island and flows over it, precipitation may result depending on temperature and the shape of the terrain. Winds that blow predominantly from one direction often create wetter conditions on the slopes that face into the wind. Areas on the opposite side can receive substantially less rainfall as descending air becomes drier. How fast wind blows affects how quickly water evaporates from surfaces. When wind patterns shift with the seasons, rainfall patterns may change accordingly. The orientation of the coastline relative to dominant wind directions helps shape local variations in climate. Vegetation distribution often reflects these differences in moisture availability across the landscape. Wind, therefore, contributes substantially to spatial variability in island environments. Atmospheric circulation creates links between island climate and the broader systems of ocean and atmosphere. When moist air encounters mountains on islands and begins to rise upslope, cooling occurs as the air gains elevation. This cooling triggers condensation, which leads to cloud formation along the mountain slopes. Precipitation tends to fall on the side of elevated terrain that faces into the prevailing winds. Air that descends down the opposite slope becomes progressively drier as it loses altitude. This effect can establish distinctly different climatic zones across surprisingly short distances on an island. Stream flow often runs stronger in the wetter highland regions where rainfall concentrates. Moisture levels in the soil typically vary according to elevation, with higher areas often retaining more water. The vegetation that covers different elevations reflects these rainfall gradients quite clearly. Orographic processes demonstrate how the shape of the land influences local water systems. The relief of an island, therefore, plays a fundamental role in shaping internal climate patterns. Surrounding ocean temperatures exert considerable influence over island climates by moderating air temperature and reducing extreme variations between seasons. Water heats up and cools down much more slowly than land surfaces do. This thermal property leads to milder seasonal temperature swings on islands compared to continental interiors. Conditions at the sea surface affect both humidity levels and how clouds form above the water. Temperature differences between land and sea can generate coastal breezes that flow predictably between the two. On smaller islands, ocean influence can penetrate well inland, rather than remaining confined to the coast. Temperature stability that results from maritime conditions may affect how quickly weathering progresses and how soil processes unfold. Local climate emerges from the interplay between maritime effects and topographic factors. Exchange between ocean and atmosphere continues without pause. Islands therefore experience climates that remain closely tied to the waters surrounding them. Ocean currents shape temperature conditions near islands by moving warm or cool water from one region to another. These currents control how much heat gets stored in surface waters. Air masses passing over these waters either gain or lose heat, depending on the water temperature below. This exchange can modify the climate characteristics experienced along the coast. Currents also play a role in distributing nutrients through nearby seas, affecting marine ecosystems around islands. Changes in current strength or direction can alter local environmental conditions noticeably. Seasonal shifts sometimes change which currents exert the strongest influence in a given area. These movements of ocean water connect distant regions through the transfer of heat across vast distances. The presence of an island does nothing to interrupt this broader circulation pattern. Currents, therefore, form an integral part of the environmental setting surrounding islands. Small islands tend to experience less temperature variation than large continental land masses, because surrounding water moderates both heating and cooling processes. During the day, warming of the land gets offset by cooler marine air flowing in from the ocean. At night, cooling gets limited by the nearby sea that retains warmth. The restricted land area prevents the development of strong temperature gradients across the island. Wind circulation helps distribute heat more evenly throughout the day and night. Cloud cover that arrives with maritime air masses can further stabilize temperatures by blocking direct sunlight and trapping radiated heat. Larger islands may show more internal temperature variation due to topographic features that create microclimates. Coastal influence reaches its greatest strength near shorelines and weakens inland. Temperature moderation stands as a defining feature of maritime environments. Island size thus plays a direct role in affecting local thermal patterns. Humidity levels on islands take shape largely from maritime air masses that transport moisture from the surrounding ocean. As air travels across the sea surface, it picks up water vapor through continuous evaporation. This moisture can result in higher average humidity levels compared to inland continental regions. Wind patterns determine how consistently moist air reaches different parts of an island and how long it lingers. Cloud formation depends on how much moisture sits in the atmosphere waiting to condense. Coastal zones may experience more frequent cloud cover due to onshore airflow bringing moisture from the ocean. Variations in humidity across an island can affect how quickly water evaporates from soil and vegetation surfaces. Condensation may occur when moist air encounters elevated terrain and cools as it rises. These atmospheric processes create connections between ocean conditions and island environments. Humidity therefore functions as a key component of island climate systems. Islands situated in tropical zones typically experience seasonal rainfall patterns that link directly to shifts in atmospheric circulation. Changes in prevailing wind direction can bring alternating periods that swing between wetter and drier conditions. Moist air masses may dominate during certain parts of the year, while drier air takes over at other times. Cloud formation increases when warm, humid air rises into cooler altitudes and condenses. How rainfall distributes itself across an island depends heavily on topographic features that force air upward. River flow often mirrors these seasonal differences, running high during wet periods and dropping during dry spells. Soil moisture levels fluctuate in rhythm with precipitation cycles throughout the year. Vegetation growth patterns can correspond closely to the timing of seasonal rainfall. Seasonal climate variation influences many environmental processes across island ecosystems. Tropical island climates, therefore, show regular annual rhythms that repeat predictably. Islands at high latitudes may have cooler climates and shorter growing seasons due to lower sun angles that reduce the amount of solar energy reaching the surface. Day length varies dramatically through the year in these regions, from long summer days to brief winter daylight. Cooler air temperatures can slow down chemical weathering processes that break down rock. Snow and ice may cover portions of the landscape during winter months. Freeze-thaw cycles contribute to physical weathering of rock as water freezes in cracks and expands. Soil development may proceed more slowly under colder conditions where biological activity slows down. Coastal waters can still influence local temperature by moderating the most extreme temperature swings. Wind exposure may be particularly strong in open ocean settings far from continental shelter. Vegetation zones often reflect limitations imposed by both temperature and moisture availability. Latitude thus plays a major role in determining the fundamental character of island climates. Vegetation on islands takes its character from soil depth and moisture availability, which together determine how successfully plants can establish themselves and grow. Deeper soils can store more water and nutrients to support plant life through dry periods. Shallow soils may support only limited plant cover that struggles during drought. Rainfall patterns influence how often moisture gets replenished in the soil reservoir. Drainage conditions affect whether soils remain waterlogged or dry out between rain events. Coastal exposure to salt spray can limit which plant types manage to survive near the shore. Wind strength can influence both plant form and where different species manage to establish themselves. Organic matter contributes to soil fertility gradually as plant material decomposes over time. Differences in elevation may create varied vegetation zones running from coast to interior highlands. Plant cover therefore emerges from the interaction between soil characteristics and climate factors. Salt-tolerant plants often establish themselves near island shorelines, where sea spray and saline soils create challenging conditions. These plants possess adaptations that allow them to manage high salt concentrations without suffering damage. Root systems may help stabilize loose coastal sediment that would otherwise wash away. Vegetation can reduce erosion by binding soil particles together with networks of roots. Wind exposure near coasts shapes plant structure and influences growth patterns toward more compact forms. Organic material from these plants gradually adds to surface soil layers as leaves and stems decompose. Distribution of salt-tolerant species often follows the zone where marine influence reaches its greatest strength. Inland areas with less salt exposure may support entirely different plant communities, better suited to fresher conditions. Coastal vegetation illustrates biological adaptation to the harsh conditions created by marine environments. Shoreline plant cover thus forms an important part of island ecosystem structure. Inland vegetation varies with elevation and rainfall, producing noticeable differences in plant cover across island landscapes. Higher elevations may receive more precipitation in many settings due to orographic effects. Temperature often decreases as altitude increases, creating cooler conditions on mountain slopes. Soil depth and drainage characteristics can change along slopes from summit to base. These environmental factors influence which plant types manage to become established in different zones. Lower slopes may accumulate deeper soils built from material that eroded from higher elevations. Wind exposure can increase with height above sea level as terrain rises into stronger air currents. Variations in sunlight due to slope orientation also affect growth, with some slopes receiving more direct sun than others. Plant distribution therefore reflects the combined influences of climate and topography working together. Elevation gradients contribute substantially to ecological diversity on islands. Island ecosystems take their distinctive character from isolation from other land areas, which limits how easily species and materials can move between locations. Ocean barriers reduce direct exchange with continents and other islands. Environmental conditions develop within this relative separation from outside influences. Nutrient cycles depend primarily on local inputs supplemented by marine connections. Colonization occurs through limited pathways like wind, water currents, or animal transport. Once organisms establish themselves, they interact within spatially confined areas. Ecosystem processes may respond with particular sensitivity to environmental changes. Isolation can influence patterns of vegetation structure and species composition. Resource availability often links closely to island size and prevailing climate conditions. Geographic separation therefore stands as a defining feature of island ecology. Limited land area can restrict ecosystem size on small islands, influencing the extent of available habitats and how resources get distributed. Smaller areas may contain fewer distinct habitat types, packed into less space. Soil and water resources can be constrained in total volume. surface processes can affect a large proportion of the entire landscape rather than just localized areas. Coastal influences may reach far inland when overall island width remains narrow. Population sizes of organisms can be limited by the available space for feeding and reproduction. Environmental fluctuations may have broader effects across the entire island system. Habitat boundaries often occur close together, creating steep gradients between zones. Energy flow through ecosystems operates within tight spatial limits imposed by geography. Land area thus shapes ecological structure and dynamics on islands. Wind and ocean currents help disperse plant seeds to islands by transporting lightweight material across water and through the air over considerable distances. Floating seeds may travel on surface currents for days or weeks before washing ashore. Strong winds can carry small seeds over long distances, sometimes hundreds of kilometers. Arrival depends on finding suitable landing conditions where seeds can take root. Moisture and soil conditions must support germination once seeds reach land. Some seeds may remain viable even after long journeys through harsh conditions. Ocean circulation patterns influence which dispersal pathways remain most likely. Storm events can increase transport opportunities by creating stronger winds and currents. Successful establishment following dispersal contributes to how vegetation develops on isolated islands. Natural dispersal creates links between islands and distant source regions. Birds can carry seeds between islands and continents when seeds either attach to their feathers or pass through their digestive systems. Movement of birds across water bodies provides an effective transport mechanism for plant dispersal. Seeds may be deposited in new locations where conditions prove suitable for growth. This process contributes significantly to plant colonization of remote islands. The effectiveness of this dispersal depends on bird migration routes and seasonal movements. Seed survival varies depending on plant species and the method of transport involved. Deposited seeds may successfully establish if soil and climate conditions prove favorable. Over time, repeated dispersal events gradually shape plant distribution patterns across island regions. Biological transport complements physical dispersal by wind and water currents. Animal movement therefore plays an important role in shaping island vegetation patterns. Nutrient input from the ocean can influence coastal island soils when marine materials get transported onto land by waves, tides, or sea spray. Organic matter from marine organisms may accumulate along the shore after washing up on beaches. Decomposed material can add valuable minerals to surface soil layers. This input can significantly affect soil chemistry near the coastline, where marine influence remains strongest. Wind may carry fine particles even further inland, beyond the immediate coastal zone. Tidal flooding in low-lying areas can deposit additional sediments that enrich the soil. Nutrient enrichment may vary depending on how exposed different coastal sections are to wave action. Soil properties, therefore, reflect contributions from both terrestrial weathering and marine sources. The interaction between ocean and land contributes to nutrient cycling in coastal ecosystems. Coastal zones show this exchange most clearly through their distinctive soil characteristics. Tides connect marine and terrestrial environments along island edges by periodically moving seawater across intertidal zones. Rising water covers areas that later become exposed when the tide retreats. This recurring cycle allows exchange of materials between sea and land environments. Sediments may be carried inland during high tide or removed during low tide. Organisms adapted to constantly changing conditions inhabit these zones between water levels. Moisture levels in coastal soils fluctuate with tidal movement throughout each day. Channels and inlets often form where tidal currents run particularly strong. The repeated movement of water shapes shoreline features over time through erosion and deposition. Tidal processes operate on both daily and seasonal scales as tides vary in height. These cycles form a regular link between island surfaces and the surrounding seas. Mangrove systems may develop along sheltered tropical island coasts, where fine sediments accumulate and wave energy remains low. Mangrove roots trap sediment particles and help stabilize shorelines against erosion. The dense root network slows water movement, allowing more sediment to settle out. Organic matter builds up progressively in these environments as plant material accumulates. Soil conditions may be waterlogged and low in oxygen due to frequent flooding. Mangroves influence nutrient cycling between land and sea through their role as filters. Their presence can significantly reduce coastal erosion by absorbing wave energy. Sediment captured by root systems can gradually raise surface levels over decades. These systems occur mainly in warm climates where temperatures support mangrove growth. Mangroves illustrate how vegetation actively interacts with coastal processes. Seagrass beds often occur in shallow waters near islands where sufficient light reaches the seabed to support photosynthesis. These underwater plants grow rooted in sandy or muddy substrates on the ocean floor. Their roots help stabilize sediment and prevent it from being swept away by currents. Water clarity directly affects their distribution since they need light to survive. Seagrass can slow water movement above the bottom, allowing suspended particles to settle. Organic matter from these plants contributes to coastal nutrient cycles as material decomposes. These habitats create connections between marine and coastal environments. Their presence can influence shoreline sediment patterns by altering how water and sediment move. Distribution depends on both depth and light availability in the water column. Seagrass systems form an important part of nearshore island environments. Coral reefs can protect island shorelines from wave energy by absorbing and dispersing much of the force carried by incoming waves. The reef structure acts as a natural barrier positioned between open ocean and land. Reduced wave energy behind the reef allows sediment to settle rather than being constantly churned up. This process can help maintain beaches and protect low-lying coastal land from erosion. Damage to reef structure may significantly change this protective effect and expose shorelines. Wave patterns influence how energy gets distributed across the reef and what reaches shore. Sediment movement in the sheltered waters behind reefs shapes coastal features over time. Reef position relative to shore affects local conditions and how much protection gets provided. Coral structures therefore play a crucial role in influencing coastal stability. Biological and physical processes work together to determine how much shoreline protection occurs. Rising sea levels can reduce the land area of low islands by submerging coastal margins and allowing waves to reach further inland than they did previously. When the average position of the sea surface increases over time, areas that were previously above water may become regularly flooded during high tides. This process becomes especially noticeable on islands with low elevation and gentle slopes, where small rises have large effects. Shoreline features such as beaches and dunes may shift landward as water occupies what were formerly dry land surfaces. Saline water can penetrate into coastal soils, influencing their chemistry and affecting what can grow there. Surface drainage patterns may change as lower-lying areas become incorporated into the marine environment. Sediment redistribution can occur as waves begin acting on newly exposed sections of coast. Vegetation zones near the shore may adjust their positions in response to altered moisture and salt conditions. Over extended time periods, the outline of the island may become more compact as peripheral land gets lost to the sea. Sea level position therefore stands as an important factor affecting the long-term stability of low-lying islands. Erosion may increase in areas where protective reefs decline because the reduction in reef structure allows more wave energy to reach the shoreline unimpeded. Reefs normally absorb a substantial part of the force carried by incoming waves before they approach land. If reef elevation lowers or structural complexity decreases due to damage, this buffering effect becomes significantly weaker. Greater wave energy arriving at the coast can enhance removal of sand and other coastal sediments. Cliffs and coastal soils may also experience higher rates of undercutting as waves attack their base. Sediment that once remained stable in place may be transported offshore into deeper water or redistributed along the coast. Changes in water depth over former reef areas can alter wave patterns and how energy travels shoreward. Shoreline configuration may adjust as erosion and deposition reach a new equilibrium. Coastal landforms that developed behind reefs are therefore strongly influenced by the condition of these offshore structures. The relationship between reef health and coastal erosion demonstrates the important link between marine ecosystems and island geomorphology. Sediment supply plays a crucial role in maintaining some low-lying islands because deposited material can offset losses caused by both erosion and sea level change. Sand and gravel may arrive from reef breakdown, coastal erosion elsewhere, or river input from inland. When sediment supply equals or exceeds removal rates, island surfaces can remain stable or even expand over time. If supply decreases while removal continues, shoreline retreat may occur progressively. Wave and current patterns determine where sediment preferentially accumulates on the island. Wind can move dry sand inland from beaches to form protective dunes. Vegetation may help trap and stabilize this loose material once it gets deposited. Seasonal variations can significantly influence the balance between sediment transport and deposition. The shape and extent of an island, therefore, depends on the ongoing movement of sediment through the coastal system. Sediment dynamics stand as a key element in the persistence of certain island types. Tectonic uplift can raise islands higher above sea level when forces within Earth's crust push land upward relative to the surrounding ocean surface. This movement may occur gradually along fault lines or in association with interactions between tectonic plates. Elevated marine terraces can form where former shorelines get lifted above the present sea level as platforms. River valleys may deepen as streams adjust their profiles to accommodate new elevations. Erosion continues working on the uplifted surface, actively shaping slopes and ridges through time. Rock layers may tilt or fracture during the uplift process as stress builds within the crust. The amount of elevation change varies considerably depending on geological setting and tectonic forces. Over long geological periods, uplift can increase the overall relief of an island dramatically. Coastal processes then begin acting on the new shoreline position that results from uplift. Crustal movement thus contributes significantly to changes in island height and overall form. Subsidence can gradually lower islands relative to sea level when the underlying crust cools down, compacts under its own weight, or moves downward. Volcanic islands may sink as the immense weight of accumulated rock causes the crust beneath to flex downward. Sediment loading in surrounding ocean basins can also influence crustal levels in adjacent areas. As land lowers progressively, coastal areas may become more frequently flooded by high tides. Lagoons and wetlands may expand into low-lying regions as water encroaches. Coral growth may partially keep pace with slow subsidence in some tropical settings where reefs grow upward. Shorelines shift position as water gradually occupies what was formerly dry land. Geological records can preserve evidence of past subsidence through drowned landforms now found below sea level. The balance between uplift and subsidence shapes long-term island elevation trajectories. Vertical crustal movement therefore stands as an important factor in island evolution over geological time. Islands are found across all major oceans, occurring in a remarkably wide range of geological and climatic settings across the planet. They appear in the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern and Arctic Oceans in diverse forms. Their distribution reflects tectonic boundaries, volcanic activity, sediment processes, and continental fragmentation over geological history. Some islands lie close to continental margins, where they form transitional zones, while others rise dramatically from deep ocean basins, far from land. Ocean currents, wind systems, and sea level changes influence their environmental conditions. Island density varies considerably between different ocean regions. Geological origin often explains their arrangement in linear chains or clustered groups. Many islands are associated with underwater ridges or active plate boundaries. Surface processes then shape their landscapes progressively over time. Global island distribution therefore reflects both deep earth processes and surface systems working together. The Pacific Ocean contains the greatest number of islands worldwide, many of which formed through volcanic and tectonic processes. Numerous island chains align with plate boundaries running through this ocean basin. Hotspot activity has also contributed to island formation in several regions where volcanic plumes rise through the crust. Coral reef systems are widespread in tropical parts of the Pacific, where conditions favor reef growth. The basin includes both high volcanic islands with dramatic relief and low coral atolls barely above sea level. Oceanic crust underlies most Pacific islands rather than continental rock. Subduction zones around the basin margins create island arcs where oceanic plates descend. Sediment processes modify coastlines after initial formation through ongoing erosion and deposition. Climatic variation occurs from equatorial regions to temperate latitudes across this vast ocean. The Pacific's geological setting supports exceptionally extensive island development. Many island groups occur throughout the Indian Ocean, where tectonic, volcanic and coral processes have produced varied island types. Some islands lie on continental fragments that separated from larger land masses, while others formed through volcanic activity. Coral atolls are present in warm tropical waters where reef-building corals thrive. Ocean currents influence sediment transport patterns around these islands significantly. Climatic patterns affect rainfall distribution and vegetation characteristics across different islands. Seafloor structures such as ridges and plate boundaries play important roles in determining island locations. The basin includes both isolated islands standing alone and archipelagos with multiple islands. Coastal features reflect the particular wave and current conditions in different areas. Geological histories differ considerably across regions within the ocean. The Indian Ocean thus contains diverse island environments with varying origins. The Maldives consist mainly of coral atolls formed on submarine ridges in warm tropical waters. Reef growth built up ring-shaped structures gradually over extended time periods. Lagoons occupy the central parts of these formations, protected by the encircling reef. Land areas are composed largely of sand derived from broken coral. Elevation above sea level is generally quite low throughout the islands. Ocean conditions influence sediment movement along the atoll rims continuously. Channels cut through the reef structure allow water exchange between lagoons and the open sea. Reef systems provide the structural foundations that support these islands. Surface features reflect biological processes and marine dynamics working together. These islands illustrate coral-based island formation in tropical settings. The Japan archipelago formed through tectonic processes at convergent plate boundaries where plates collide. Subduction of oceanic plates beneath continental crust generated volcanic activity that built many of the islands over time. Mountainous terrain throughout the islands reflects this dramatic geological origin. Earthquakes occur regularly due to ongoing plate movement that continues today. Sediment from erosion in the highlands accumulates in coastal plains along the margins. Offshore trenches mark zones where plate interaction occurs at great depth. Volcanic rocks are common throughout the archipelago as evidence of eruptive activity. Surface processes continue shaping slopes and coastlines through erosion and deposition. Climatic variation occurs from north to south across the archipelago's considerable extent. Japan's islands therefore reflect active tectonic environments in vivid detail. The islands of Indonesia lie along active plate boundaries where several tectonic plates meet in complex arrangements. Subduction zones produce volcanic island chains through melting of descending plates. Magma generated at depth rises upward to form volcanic landforms at the surface. Earthquake activity accompanies plate interactions in this tectonically active region. Sedimentary basins occur between volcanic arcs where sediment accumulates. Erosion and deposition shape coastal lowlands around the volcanic islands. Coral reefs develop in the surrounding warm seas where conditions support reef growth. River systems transport sediment from interior slopes toward the coast. Geological diversity is remarkably high across this region. Indonesia's islands illustrate complex tectonic settings where multiple processes interact. Archipelagos are groups or chains of islands that share a common geological origin or exist within a regional setting. They may form along plate boundaries, above hotspots, or through sedimentary systems. Spacing between individual islands can reflect underlying geological structures. Some archipelagos consist mainly of volcanic islands built from eruptions. Others include coral formations or continental fragments. Ocean currents influence how sediment gets distributed among the islands. Climatic conditions may vary considerably even within a single island group. Ecological connections can occur through dispersal processes linking the islands. Surface processes modify individual islands progressively over time. Archipelagos represent clustered island systems with shared characteristics. Island spacing in archipelagos often reflects their geological origin, such as the movement of tectonic plates over stationary hotspots or alignment along fault systems. Linear arrangements may indicate the direction of plate motion over time. Curved patterns can reflect the geometry of subduction zones where plates descend. Distances between successive islands may correspond to intervals between volcanic eruptions. Submerged features can link visible islands beneath the ocean surface. Sediment may accumulate in the spaces between closely spaced islands. Ocean depth varies considerably across different archipelagos. Structural geology controls the foundation upon which each island rests. Surface landscapes differ despite islands sharing common origins. Spacing patterns provide valuable insight into the processes that formed islands. Some archipelagos form along mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates diverge and magma rises to create new oceanic crust. Volcanic activity occurs along these underwater mountain ranges that span ocean basins. If volcanic peaks grow high enough above the seafloor, they can emerge above sea level. Islands formed this way may align with the axis of the ridge. Rock types often include basalt, derived from magma originating in the mantle. Hydrothermal systems can exist along ridge segments where hot fluids circulate. Spreading rates influence how island development proceeds over time. Erosion begins working on the landscape once land becomes exposed to the atmosphere. Sediment may collect on surrounding submarine slopes. Mid-ocean ridge islands show clear links between crustal formation processes and surface land. Mid-ocean ridges are underwater mountain ranges created by plate divergence, where new oceanic crust forms continuously as magma rises and cools. These ridges extend across ocean basins for thousands of kilometers. Volcanic activity is common along their entire length. The ridge crest often contains a central rift zone where plates are actively separating. Hydrothermal vents occur where cold seawater interacts with hot rock deep below. Ridge elevation stands higher than the surrounding abyssal seafloor. Movement of plates away from the ridge axis carries newly formed crust outward. Islands may form where volcanic output becomes sufficient to build above sea level. Geological structure reflects the ongoing process of crustal generation. Mid-ocean ridges stand as key features of oceanic geology. New oceanic crust forms at spreading ridges as molten material rises from depth and solidifies along diverging plate boundaries. This process continuously adds material to the edges of plates moving apart. Basaltic rock typically composes this new crust formed from mantle material. As crust moves away from the ridge axis, it cools and becomes progressively denser. Sediments gradually accumulate on its surface as it ages. Magnetic patterns preserved in the rock record the history of plate movement. Volcanic islands may develop where crust builds upward sufficiently. Surface exposure allows weathering processes to begin immediately. Interaction with seawater alters rock chemistry over time. Crust formation at ridges underlies the origins of some islands. Volcanic islands may show distinct layers of solidified lava flows that record successive eruptions occurring over time. Each eruption can deposit a layer with distinctive characteristics. Differences in texture and composition may appear between individual flows. Ash and fragmented material can be interbedded between lava layers. Erosion may expose these layers dramatically in coastal cliffs. Slope angles reflect the style of eruption that produced them. Internal structure influences how drainage patterns develop. Weathering gradually softens sharp volcanic features over centuries. Soil develops from altered volcanic rock as minerals break down. Layered construction reveals the complete history of island growth. Coral sand on some islands comes from broken reef material that has been reduced to small particles by persistent wave action. Fragments of coral skeletons and shells contribute substantially to this sediment. Waves move these particles across reef flats and toward shore. Accumulation occurs where water energy decreases sufficiently. Wind can transport dry sand inland from beaches. Beach and dune systems may form entirely from this biologically derived material. Grain size affects how easily sand moves under different conditions. Organic material may mix with mineral fragments from other sources. Sand supply depends on reef productivity and breakdown rates. Coral sand clearly reflects the biological origin of this sediment type. Island lagoons are shallow bodies of water separated from the open sea by reef structures or sand barriers. They often occur within atolls or behind barrier islands along coasts. Water exchange may happen through channels cutting through the barrier. Sediment can accumulate gradually on lagoon floors over time. Depth varies depending on rates of deposition and water movement. Lagoons may be considerably calmer than adjacent ocean areas. Tidal flow influences circulation patterns within the lagoon. Salinity can change with evaporation during dry periods and rainfall during wet seasons. These water bodies create connections between marine and coastal systems. Lagoons are common features of certain island types. Coastal lagoons can form behind sand barriers where wave-built ridges isolate sections of shallow sea from the ocean. Sediment transport processes shape the barrier over time. Water exchange with the ocean may be quite limited. Lagoon water levels respond to both tides and local rainfall inputs. Fine sediments often settle in these sheltered areas, away from wave energy. Vegetation may establish itself along lagoon margins where conditions permit. Barrier stability directly influences how long lagoons persist. Channels may open through barriers during powerful storms. These features illustrate ongoing interactions between waves and sediment. Coastal lagoons are dynamic environments constantly adjusting. Tidal inlets connect some lagoons to the ocean, allowing water and sediment to move between the two environments. inlet size can change with variations in tidal current strength. Tidal currents may scour deep channels through the barrier. Sandbars can form near inlet mouths where currents slow. Water exchange through inlets influences both salinity and sedimentation patterns. Storms may significantly modify inlet shape and position. Inlets can migrate along the coast over time. Their presence affects circulation within the lagoon. Sediment carried through inlets contributes to ongoing coastal change. Tidal inlets serve as key links in barrier lagoon systems. Groundwater on small islands can be affected by saltwater intrusion when seawater moves into zones that normally contain fresh water. This occurs if freshwater pressure decreases due to reduced rainfall or excessive pumping. Porous sediments allow mixing at depth between the two water types. The freshwater lens may thin progressively as salt water advances upward. Recharge from rainfall can push saline water back down temporarily. Coastal pumping may alter the delicate balance between fresh and salt water. Soil salinity near shorelines can increase as salt water rises. Aquifer management influences long-term stability of freshwater supplies. Subsurface interactions shape water quality available for use. Saltwater intrusion demonstrates the intimate connection between groundwater systems and the sea. Permeable rock allows seawater and freshwater to interact underground through networks of pores and fractures. Movement depends on pressure differences between water bodies. Freshwater generally overlies denser seawater in a relatively stable configuration. Mixing zones may shift position with changes in rainfall or water extraction. Mineral exchange can occur in these transition zones. Groundwater flow paths influence where surface springs emerge. Coastal geology determines overall permeability of the subsurface. Changes in sea level can alter the subsurface balance between water types. Chemical composition of groundwater reflects this ongoing interaction. Subsurface exchange creates links between island hydrology and the ocean. Island topography influences drainage patterns fundamentally by determining how water flows across the land surface. Slopes direct runoff toward lower-lying areas through gravity. Steeper terrain promotes faster flow velocities. Valleys may form preferentially along zones of weaker rock. Flat areas allow considerably slower drainage. Soil permeability affects how much water infiltrates versus running off. Vegetation cover can reduce surface runoff by intercepting rainfall. Stream networks reflect elevation differences across the landscape. Erosion shapes channels progressively over time. Topography is therefore central to understanding island hydrology. Steep islands often have short, fast-flowing streams because water descends quickly from higher elevations directly to the sea. Channels may be narrow and deeply incised into bedrock. Rapid flow velocities can transport coarse sediment downstream. Flashy discharge patterns may occur immediately after rainfall events. Waterfalls can develop along layers of resistant rock. Limited floodplains are common due to steep valley walls. Erosion rates may be notably higher on these steep slopes. Sediment reaches the coast in short time periods after storms. Stream length is constrained by the limited size of the island. Steep relief profoundly shapes fluvial systems. Flat islands may have limited surface drainage because low gradients slow the movement of water toward the coast. Water may collect in shallow depressions rather than flowing away. Wetlands can form where drainage is particularly poor. Subsurface flow may play a larger role than surface streams in moving water. Soil saturation can persist for extended periods after rainfall. Channels, if present, may be quite shallow. Evaporation influences water balance significantly. Slight elevation changes can determine flow paths disproportionately. Drainage networks are often sparse and poorly developed. Low relief, therefore, strongly affects hydrological patterns on islands.